My dear students, I am Dr. Terrence Mukhia from the Department of English, Salesian College, Sonada. I am going to deliver a lecture on Beowulf. This is my second lecture on Beowulf, part 2. Here I will be dealing with pagan and Christian elements in Beowulf, followed by historical significance. This lecture is meant for the first year English honors students, second semester core course 4. We find a fusion of Christian and pagan elements in Beowulf. Throughout the poem, the epic tale blends the pagan ideals of vengeance, feuds, fate, and pride with Christian elements and the will of God. Christian elements are illustrated in Beowulf through biblical allegories and references of God, creation, Hades, heaven, hell, and so on. These elements that have been so uniquely combined in the poem define the heroic warrior Beowulf and the evil menace, Grendel's mother. The reader is introduced to Grendel's mother through her lineage. From Cain sprang many a devil sent by fate. The Old Testament character Cain and the pagan idea of fate have been merged to characterize Grendel's mother. Our hero Beowulf himself is defined in terms of weird. To quote Beowulf, fate often saves the undoomed man when his courage is good. The pagan idea of fate has been merged with the idea of the free will given by God. Man is not really controlled by fate, by God. God made the sea still and saved his people. Similarly, he would save his people from sea monsters, and he would make use of people like Beowulf. The pagan element of revenge finds a significant place. Grendel's mother seeks revenge on her son's death, and Beowulf is persuaded to take vengeance for Askir's death. A Christian and pagan version of Comitatus lead Beowulf to avenge Askir's death. Comitatus is an agreement of loyalty and protection that men have with their Lord. Such a fusion of Christian and pagan ideals is a reflection of the time of composition. The ideals of the heathen heroic age were getting tempered by the gentleness of the new belief, is Christianity. The Christian poet had the task of treating this original pagan material in a manner acceptable to a Christian audience. Beowulf's chief adversaries are not men but monsters. Further, the king of the Geats did not seek wars with the neighboring tribes, so there was a Christian appreciation for peace among humans. They were fighting their common enemy, the evil represented by the monsters, Grendel, his mother, and the dragon. So the primitive Germanic thirst for vengeance has been given a set aside. When Grendel, the evil, enters Heorot, he is fearing God's anger, and it was fighting against God. Here the pagan idea of Ragnarok has been introduced to show that Beowulf was fighting for God. Ragnarok is the end of the world when all good warriors must fight for their God. Beowulf must end the war of Ragnarok. He himself says, each of us must await his end of the world's life. Beowulf promises to kill Grendel's mother as well. Finally, he fights the dragon. Beowulf has lots of elegiac elements in it. There is an absence of the sense of joy in life, which is necessary to make the work of imagination healthy. Note of happiness in Beowulf is rare. Life is seen as guided by fate. There are constant allusions to the nothingness of life, of courage, and of glory, and although Beowulf is in every point a hero, the ideal of an active force serving good and triumphing over evil, the poem does not convey that effect of fortifying energy which might be expected of it. The tone of the poem is bitter and melancholic. It makes life seem sad and all the effort useless. When Hrothgar says to Beowulf, "Seek her out if you dare," "Sorrow not, wise man," Beowulf replies, "Each of us shall the end await of worldly life. Let him who may gain honor or death." The pagan writer Beowulf has plumbed the emptiness of morality, and Legois hardly exaggerates when he says, quote, "It breathes the air of the tomb," unquote. Here it refers to Beowulf. There are Christian elements in Beowulf as well. In different parts of the poem, Christian elements are seen. While giving the description of Heorot among its desolate moors, the poet suddenly digresses and makes an irrelevant reference to the creation of the world. Like a true Christian, the poet says that it was the Almighty God who created the heaven and earth and the ocean, to set the sun and the moon, to give light to dwellers of the land, and adorn the fields of the earth with branched and leafy leaves. In another passage, the poet records the Christian belief that all the demons, elves, and fearful sea monsters grew out of the race of Cain the monster. Further, after Beowulf's victory over Grendel, Hrothgar thanks God for the death of Grendel and says that Beowulf's work was done in the strength of God. Quote, "The King of glory works wonder and wonder. Let thanks to him be quickly given. How hath the hero through the might of God done that which all our wisdom could not do." Unquote. Just before Beowulf dies, he thanks God. He talks about Lord of all, that by death he has gained more riches for his people. So a Christian belief in God is vivid in Beowulf. Now let's talk about the historical value of Beowulf. The historical value of Beowulf lies in the fact that it gives us the picture of the ancient Teutonic life, the life lived by the forebears of the English before they left their Germanic homes and crossed over to England. Beowulf means bear. Whether Beowulf was a real historical person or not, his character fits seamlessly into the context of his society. Nevertheless, many of the characters were real: the Gate King, Hygelac, Hrothgar, Ongthu, Hæthcyn, Onela, and so on. The world that Beowulf depicts and the heroic code of honor that defines much of the story is a relic of pre-Anglo-Saxon culture. Though it is a traditional story, part of a Germanic oral tradition, the poem as we have it is thought to be the work of a single poet. For the first 100 years of Beowulf's prominence, interest in the poem was primarily historical. So the scholars were considering it as a source of information. It was not until 1936 when the Oxford scholar J.R.R. Tolkien, who later wrote The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, published a groundbreaking paper titled Beowulf, The Monsters and the Critics, that the manuscript gained recognition as a serious work of art. It is a story of the supernatural as well as a record of Anglo-Saxon history, because there was little literacy and few books in medieval England, and at that time Scots were the ones recording history. Beowulf takes place in the 6th century Denmark and Sweden. The Geats inhabited the southern part of Sweden, and Hrothgar and his glorious Meadhall Heorot were from the Danish island. Archaeologists who have worked there have discovered a number of magnificent halls that were built around 500 AD and onward, any of which could have been Heorot. The date that Beowulf was conceived is uncertain. It was definitely composed after Hygelac's death in 521 AD, and most likely after 580 AD, because that is the assumed date of Beowulf's death. It can't though be later than 1000 AD, because the manuscript was already written by then. If Beowulf were created in the 7th or 8th centuries, it can be further narrowed down by considering whether the author might have lived or not. Scholars believe there are 3 possibilities: Northumbria during the age of Bede in the late 7th and 8th centuries, during the King Offa's reign in Mercia in the latter half of the 8th century, or East Anglia during the 600s. We mentioned in part 1 about the possibility that Beowulf was composed in Northumbria, but it is no longer a popular idea. The The idea of Mukhia is possible because of the references to the king in the poem may have been a tribute to the poet's patron. That the poem's origin comes from East Anglia is quite a popular notion today. Beowulf could be an effort to define East Anglican history all the way back to Scandinavia. In fact, Beowulf is a pagan poem. It was originally written by a pagan poet, but later it was revised by a Christian poet. No Christian poet would have composed the account of Beowulf's funeral rites and his cremation in a huge pyre and not a burial. It is true that there is no reference to heathen gods and to heathen worship, but most probably these were suppressed or altered by a Christian poet who revised the poem. The philosophy of life, melancholy, sober and stern, is essentially pagan. The world in Beowulf is utterly destitute of faith, hope, which in its own way has enriched the English literature. Thank you.
This and other episodes of Radio EduPod's Radio for Learning are available on Listen to My Radio app at 6 p.m. from Monday to Friday and at 6 a.m. from Tuesday to Saturday. All episodes are available on Salesian TV YouTube channel. Share, like and subscribe Salesian TV, the ultimate learning resource channel.